Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video explores an alternate version of events and characters in a reimagined storyline. This presentation is structured and adapted into an audiobook style format with narration and visuals to enhance the experience. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story.
Catelyn, it has been a month since Sansa was taken by the Lannisters. A month in which search parties have been sent out and scoured each and every corner of the Riverlands and the Westerlands and have turned up not a sight of her daughter. A month in which Catelyn has begun to fear the worst. It was the mountain that rides. Ser Gregor Clegane, who took her daughter, of that much all agree. Where he has taken her, whether it be to King's Landing or to some other unknown location, no one knows, but there is a silent sort of agreement that wherever her daughter is, nothing good could have befallen her, with the mountain as her captor. Sometimes at night, Catelyn remembers Ned telling her of when Princess Rhaenys and Prince Aegon Jon's half-siblings' bodies were presented to Robert sat on the Iron Throne, and how their bodies had been so mutilated, everyone present had had to look away, and in her darkest moments when she despairs so deeply of ever finding her daughter again, she closes her eyes and pictures Sansa's lifeless body strewn on the floor in front of the Iron Throne. The Lannisters laughing all the while. What makes it worse is that her Sansa was pregnant when she was taken. Whether she will be once they find her, whether she or the babe will survive whatever treatment she is given, worries her beyond belief. She is only slightly relieved that Arya, Rickon, Robb and Jon are still here with her. Arya has become very quiet and angry since Sansa was taken, and it took several men to prevent her from attacking Harrenhal or Lady Jane afterwards. Rickon, though he has become more familiar with her, and sticks to her as he used before. All this chaos started, and they all lived in Winterfell, and Ned was alive. Does not fully understand why everyone is so ill-tempered, and why Sansa, Sani he calls her, is not there to play with him when Arya goes off into one of her moods. Robb, her son, her eldest son, is Jon's unofficial hand. His right-hand man, has taken it upon himself to continue to lead the war effort, though he himself is still recovering from wounds taken in the north. Robb has led many search parties looking for Sansa, and each time came back empty-handed and dejected. Her boy has grown more and more solemn as the days have worn on, becoming more and more like his father than he ever was before. Not even the presence of Theon, the man he considers a brother, with his light-hearted japes and jests, is enough to bring a smile back to Robb's face. No, Robb set off for Maidenpool a week ago, deciding that if they truly wished to defeat the Lannisters once and for all, they would need the strength of 2 extra dragons, which could be found in Maidenpool, formerly the seat of House Mouton, now the seat of Daenerys Targaryen, Jon's aunt, and a potential rival claimant for the Iron Throne should she so choose. Robb had tried to get her and Arya and Rickon back to Winterfell, but she had vehemently refused to return north. Not until Sansa came back to them, not whilst there was a war still going on. Robb had acquiesced to her, but when news had come from the Blue Fork, written Dickon Tarley's hand, that Mathis Rowan and his men had been killed and defeated, Robb had once again asked her, then pleaded with her to return north, to Winterfell, or if not Winterfell to White Harbor, to where it would be safe. Again she had refused, pointing out to Robb that with Randyll Tarley dead, and the snow falling all the more heavily now, it would be impractical and foolish for her and Arya and Rickon to leave. Robb had reluctantly allowed her to stay, though he had made her uncle Sir Brendan swear to take her north should anything happen to him before he could return. Jon, her son, who was not her son, he altered between consciousness and unconsciousness, so frequently that Maester Veemon had said that it was a wonder that he was still alive. The wounds that Jon had received from the stabbing Harrenhal had given him had been quite severe and quite close to some vital organs. Had they been an inch more to the center, Jon would have been dead by now, and their cause finished. But Jon lived on. He fought on, whether or not it was because of the will to be king or because Sansa was not there. Catelyn knew not, though she did know, having spent some time tending to him herself, that Jon frequently called out for Sansa whilst he slept. Ghost as ever remained a sentinel beside his bed, not allowing anyone who was not part of the immediate family come near him, and Seros Jon's black behemoth of a dragon roars and belching of flames could be heard all the way in Riverrun, and the surrounding area, despite him being tied to several trees in the Whispering Wood. She knew many of the men in Riverrun and around the Riverlands were deeply scared by Seros, for dragons had not been seen in Westeros for nigh on 200 years. But Catelyn thought just as she had when her children had come back with the direwolves and summer had saved her. Brandon's life, that perhaps the dragons were meant to come back from the dead, perhaps it was a sign from the gods. She often felt that Ghost, Grey Wind, Shaggy Dog, and Nymeria were more than just direwolves. It was as if they were something more, something connected to her children through some sort of intricate link that was beyond mere understanding. It was the same feeling she got whenever she ventured out into the woods and heard Serak's growling and roaring from afar. Their attempts to get Harrenhal to talk about who had planned the kidnapping of her daughter, of his queen, for she knew the Westerlings had bent the knee to Jon when the crag had fallen. Robb had told her that, but Harrenhal remained tight-lipped, and not even some of the more unhonorable forms of persuasion and questioning could do more than draw a few frenzied words from his mouth. He had screamed that Tywin Lannister had been plotting with his mother for a way to remove Jon and Robb from the war for good, and had been plotting with Rose Bolton as well, and that Robb and Jon were meant to have died at Robb and Edmure's wedding, though of course they had not. For Walder Frey had had a change of heart upon seeing Jon and Serak, as Robb and Jon had told her when they had come back to Riverrun, and Rose Bolton and his bastard had paid for their attempted treachery with their lives. When Harrenhal was told this, he continued screaming about how the Lannisters had continued to insist upon somehow weakening Jon's cause, and he had screamed that there was a spy in their army who reported back to Petter, who had come up with the idea for Sansa to be taking. Catelyn could not believe that though, yes, there might be a spy in their army. That was always a possibility during war. But she could not believe that Petter, who had helped her and Ned when they had been looking for Bran's attempted killer, and for whom had helped Ned when he had been looking to discover who had been behind Jon Arryn's death, who had been like a little brother to her when they were growing up, could plan such a thing. Then she thought about how he had challenged Brandon Stark, Ned's brother, to a duel for her hand all those years ago, and how Brandon had nearly killed him, had refrained from doing so because she had pleaded with him not to, and she felt a jolt of panic envelope her. She knew Petter had been sent to the Eyrie to wed Lysa, and to get her to bring the Vale to the side of the Lannisters. It would make sense therefore for him to plan to have Sansa taken captive. But she knew not what to do or whom to believe, which was why she found herself walking down toward the dungeons, Brienne following her like a shadow. As she stood in front of his cell, holding her torch up high and watching him squint in light of the flame, she thought of how different the man looked now compared to when she had seen him at Winterfell. His golden hair no longer shone. Instead it was damp with grease and sweat, and he had a beard, a golden beard, but it was lined with dirt and filth. "Ah, Lady Stark, such a delight to see you. I'm afraid I have nothing here to offer you, but my own pleasant company. To what do I owe the pleasure?" She heard the Kingslayer ask in that mocking voice of his. Catelyn kept her expression blank when she said, "I have come to ask you a few questions." She heard him chuckle, and wondered if he had lost his senses. "Of course you have, but I am a Lancel after all, and we do expect certain things in return for what we give. I have a few of my own questions that I wish to have answered. For you see the jailers here are woefully bad at lying, though they do so take pleasure in mocking me. I'll answer your questions if you answer mine." Catelyn was silent for a moment, before saying deal. She saw the Kingslayer smile then and say, "Excellent. So then, Lady Stark, what is it that you wish to ask of me?" Catelyn hesitated for a moment. She had so many questions she wished to ask, but only a few of them would give her the answers she truly wanted. She took a deep breath, then asked, the first question that had haunted her for many, many moons. "Did you push my son Brandon from the tower in Winterfell?" There was silence. Then the Kingslayer replied, "Yes, and I would do it again if I had to." Catelyn was horrified. "Why? He was but a boy. He did no wrong to you." The Kingslayer sighed then. He was spying. He saw something that he was not supposed to see. Silence then. He saw you and your sister. The Kingslayer sighed once more before saying yes. Yes, he did. Catelyn felt disgust well up in her stomach. She had to hold back the urge to strangle the man there and then. Instead, she asked, "So you pushed him from the tower, and then when you were safely back in King's Landing, you sent an assassin to kill him?" The man had the audacity to laugh then. "Oh, Lady Stark, I pity you, and truly I do. Tell me, my lady, why would I want your son dead? Because you wished for him not tell a soul what he had seen." "Ah, but Lady Stark, if I wished for him to die, I would do it myself. I would not send some assassin to kill him. And before you asked, Tyrion did not send the man either. Now I have some questions that I wish answered." "Go on." She heard the man take a deep breath and then ask, "Is it true that the rock has fallen?" Catelyn nodded, then heard the man take a deep shuddering breath before he started laughing once more. Your boys are very smart. Then again, I suppose it helps, eh? Being a Stark. And who as your nephew decided to give the rock to once this war is done, and he survives? Catelyn hesitated for a minute, then said, Torrhen Karstark. He has married your cousin Serena. The Kingslayer was silent for a minute, then said, That is all I wish to know, but I suspect that you have some more questions. Go ahead and ask, and I shall see if I can answer them. Catelyn thought carefully about what she needed to know next, for she knew the question she wished to ask could have damning consequences for herself and for Sansa. Taking a deep breath, she asked, If neither you, your sister, nor brother sent that man after my son, then why did Lord Baelish confess to myself and my husband that the same dagger that had been his once was now in the possession of your brother? The Kingslayer laughed again and said, Oh, come now, Lady Stark. Surely you are not so foolish as to know that Littlefinger was lying. Catelyn felt her heart sink. What do you mean? The man chuckled and said, Lord Baelish used to go around court claiming that he had had you and your sister's maidenheads before either of your respective husbands, and that you and he were lovers long before Lord Stark ever sought your hand for his son. He also kept up an affair with Lady Lysa for years when Lord Arryn was still alive. Catelyn felt her heart sink then. Her worst fears had been confirmed. It was Peta who had planned her daughter's kidnapping. She said nothing more to the Kingslayer as she left him to his cell, Brienne on her heels. She dismissed Brienne from her side, as she mounted a horse and rode out of Riverrun's courtyard during the night and made for the Whispering Wood. If Peta had planned her daughter's kidnapping, then she knew where she would be. She stood before Serak, who looked at her with his blood-red eyes. He looked at her as she made her way to the chain that bound him to the trees, and as she took the key from her pocket and undid the lock, she whispered to him, Find Sansa, find her where the falcon flies, find her and bring her home. She moved backwards as Serak got ready to fly, and when he eventually did jump into the air and flew, he let loose a terrifying roar, and Catelyn Stark could only hope that she had done the right thing. Braids. Since Lord Tywin had left with his men, King's Landing had become a much quieter place. There was less hustle and bustle in the streets, and with the Tyrells and their men gone, there was also less likely to be fighting in the streets. What with the Dornish contingent led by Prince Oberyn finally in the city, of course that did not mean that there was no tension or drama. As a matter of fact, Varys knew that Queen Cersei deeply mistrusted Prince Oberyn and the Dornish men and women that he had brought with him. For whilst he had pledged his fealty to the Iron Throne and to Joffrey before court just the other day, Lord Ironwood and several other important Dornish lords were off fighting in the Riverlands. For King Jon, and of course these same Dornish lords had played a hand in the defeat of Mathis Rowan and his men at the Battle of the Blue Fork, which had been a huge blow to the Lannisters, for it now meant that they no longer outnumbered King Jon's forces. In fact, it was now the other way around. And Varys' spies within both armies had reported that Lord Tully had led a force of some 5,000 men south to Harrenhal, where he had joined with Lord Royce and his 20,000 Vale men, and that they were preparing for a battle with the host commanded by Tywin Lannister and Mace Tyrell, in an attempt to distract Lord Tywin from the fact that Lord Robb Stark was making his way to Maidenpool to treat with Daenerys Stormborn and secure her alliance and her dragons for his cousin King Jon. Of King Jon, Varys' little birds within Riverrun reported that he fell in and out of consciousness daily, and that he called out for the Lady Sansa almost frequently during his sleep. Varys was worried. The wounds that he had received from Sir Reynolds' knife were not life-threatening, though it seemed that King Jon was in limbo, subconsciously over whether or not he should allow himself to sleep or to fight the fatigue, and wake up and lead his men. Of course, if he were to get better, he would not be in a fit state to lead his men for some time, due to the nature of his wounds and how they would play into him riding his dragon. Also, there was the fact that Tywin Lannister had said that should King Jon take the field against them, he would have Queen Sansa and her baby killed. Varys knew that threat would deeply worry King Jon and the Starks, and may even serve to cripple their war efforts. However, Varys knew one thing that Lord Tywin did not. For although it had been Littlefinger's suggestion that Queen Sansa be kidnapped and taken from Riverrun and brought to King's Landing to cripple King Jon's war effort, Varys' little birds had reported that the man had his own motives. For long Varys had suspected that Littlefinger had had more of a hand in Jon Arryn's death than appeared likely upon first inspection. For though Littlefinger thought himself a master of the game, really he was just a novice. For Varys had eyes everywhere, in the Red Keep, and all over Westeros. If truth be told, and had heard the reports that his little birds had brought him of the illicit affair between Littlefinger and Lady Lysa, and how Littlefinger had used Lady Lysa's love for him to further his own position in life, allowing him to come first to Gulltown and then to King's Landing, where he had begun plotting a much more dangerous game war. Varys suspected that there were only two things that Littlefinger wanted in life: power and Catelyn Tully. His boasts about how he had taken Catelyn Stark's maidenhead were empty and pointless. Varys had done his searching and knew that it had been Lysa Arryn's Zanehead he had taken, not Catelyn Stark's. Varys also knew that Lady Stark's marriage to Eddard Stark constantly rattled Littlefinger, even now, when Lord Stark was dead and buried. Littlefinger, Varys suspected, no longer pined after Catelyn Stark and instead had set his sights on Queen Sansa. Hence why he had suggested the plot in the first place, and why Varys found himself sneaking around the Red Keep in the dead of the night, and found himself standing in front of Prince Oberyn's chambers waiting for the prince, or his paramour, to answer the door. As it happened, it was Prince Oberyn who opened the door. The prince merely looked at Varys once before he said, "Come in then, Lord Varys." Varys was slightly taken aback that Oberyn knew it was him, for he had taken care to disguise his appearance, and looked much different to how he did during the day, or when he went to pay Lord Tyrion a visit. Prince Oberyn clearly noticed his surprise, for he laughed and said, "You did not expect that disguise to fool me, Lord Varys. I have known many spiders in my time and have acted as one too." Varys merely nodded, and took the seat offered to him. They were silent for a few moments, then Varys saw Ellaria Sand, Prince Oberyn's paramour, emerge from her, and the prince's chamber clad in only a night robe. She sat herself down on Oberyn's knee, and smiled seductively at Varys. He tittered. Prince Oberyn waited for a few more moments, then said, "What is it you want, Lord Varys? I have many odd duties to attend to." He looked at Ellaria then, and she giggled. Varys waited for a moment, then said, "I know that you have come here for Justice, Prince Oberyn, for Elia and her children. And I know that you know that so long as the Lancers are alive, your sister and her children shall never have their justice." He paused and saw Oberyn's hands tighten on his chair. Varys went on, "I also know that you have pledged your loyalty to Joffrey Baratheon, that your brother instructed Lord Euronwood to fight for King Jon. I know that Dorne really is fighting for his grace King Jon, and that you are here only as a pretext." Oberyn's face whitened, then, and Varys had to repress a chuckle. "My prince, you know that I am a spider, but my web goes far beyond this keep, and this city. It goes far beyond Westeros, also. But that is not important. Right now, what I need to know is what are you willing to do for your king?" Ellaria Sand snorted, and said, "We have sent men under Lord Euronwood to fight for him. We have come here to prepare the city for him. What more could we do?" Before Varys could answer, Oberyn spoke. "You want me to get Queen Sansa from wherever the Lancers have hidden her. Is that it?" Varys nodded. "Very good, Prince Oberyn. Very good. But not from wherever, for she shall be in the Vale. But from whom? Lord Baelish holds her, and will do all he can to keep her. His Grace King Jon will look more favorably on you if you rescue his wife and lady love from the man. I believe you are an expert at subterfuge, and poison my prince." Oberyn nodded, and Varys smiled then and said, "Then this should be no trouble for you at all." Three-eyed Crow. The winter of all winters was fast descending on Westeros. As he had seen so, it was happening, like it had millennia ago when the children had walked the earth, as the kings along with the first men and dragons had flown through the skies of Ashaya and Essos. It was cold outside, that much he could tell from the way the trees shook in the wind and in the way the snow fell heavy onto the leaves. But he could not feel the cold, had not been able to feel the cold for a long time. The last time he had truly felt the cold, it had been when he had gone on a big ranging some 60 years ago now. There was snow on the ground and dead animals everywhere. It seemed that the giants had been marching south, not wildlings this time, but giants, led by Tuareg the Strong, last of the giant kings. There had been a fierce battle between the brothers of the Night's Watch and the giants. It ended with many dead on both sides, including Tuareg and Lord Commander Harlaw. When they had returned to Castle Black, he had been made Lord Commander by a unanimous vote. That was the last time he had truly felt the cold, for the next 10 years had been high summer, but he had felt the cold in his bones. It had been that had led him out far from his party that day, when he had been 75 and close to dying. He had found the cave, or the cave had found him. He knew not any more, and he had been taught about his powers and his ability, and he had dreamed and seen and watched. He had seen all kinds of things. It was he who sent Cold Hands to lead the brother Samwell back safely to the Wall, after the mutiny in Cryster's Keep. It was he who had allowed Benjen Stark to live through the attacks of the Whites and the White Walkers. He had done much seeing during his time here in the Cave of the Children, and there was still something he did not truly understand about the White Walkers, like where they came from, or where they had been for the past millennia. But one thing he did understand was that their coming had awakened magic in the realm once more, and had allowed the prince's dragon to be born as well as the Stormborn's. He knew that for them to be stopped, the dragon must have 3 heads. So far he knew of 2, but the third he was not so sure of. The prince did not have his sword either, the sword to break the darkness and welcome the light. The Stormborn did not wield weapons and was fast falling into the trap that had captured many of their family for generations. Madness. He was helpless to stop the descent. He could only hope that she would not wage war with the prince for the throne. They needed to be united before they could fight the White Walkers, and the Prince of the Green needed to arrive. He needed to be taught all that he could. Yet the three-eyed crow knew that his time was fast running out. Ever since he had called for the boy to come, he had felt his strength waning, had felt himself lost in dreams more often than not. He knew that he could not pass on until the boy had been trained, for the boy would be able to learn more about the prince than he had ever been able to. The boy would be able to find the third head of the dragon, where he and Rhaegar had failed. The boy would know when and how to send Darksister to the third head, for that was what the sword had been forged for. Deep in the fires of Ashai, back when the long night had reigned, had it been forged and brought. Though of course the Red Woman was still out there, was still alive, and wandering Westeros. That was not good. She needed to be dead for the prince to succeed, for the White Walkers to be crushed, for otherwise she would awaken those of the flame that were best not awoken. Creatures so foul that they scared even he, years after he had learned of their existence and had faced them down. No Melisandre of Ashai would have to die, and one way or another he would have to make sure of it. Of course he could always contact the man he knew as distant kin, the man whose father he had once known, though he was reluctant to do so, for the man's father had been mad, and the man himself had been plotting things that even made his head turn, and he had been a master plotter back when he had been human. No, he decided that he would wait for the boy to come with the Crannog people. He would teach the boy all he knew and had learnt in his years as a greenseer, and then when the boy was finally ready, he would depart this world for the peace that had been denied him for all those years. He could almost hear Serak calling him, calling his name, opening her arms to welcome him into her embrace, feel her lips on his, and feel her wetness around him. Oh, how he yearned for her. He had not thought about her for so long now. But now that he could not satisfy his craving for her. It had been too long. She had been gone too long. He wondered what would happen if he said her name now. Not the name she had had when he had known her, but the name she had had long ago when both of them had been young and foolish, before life had seemed to rip them apart. Deep down in the cave of the children of the forest, the three-eyed crown opened his eye and mouth, and, with a voice hoarse from disuse, whispered a name that had not been heard in Westeros for many years. Quaif. The mother, who was not his mother, had unbound his chains, and said for him to go and find his mate, his wife. He looked at her, saw the hope and the fear in her eyes, and knew that something was troubling her deeply. But in this body he did not have the ability to speak human words. He could only roar and growl and breathe fire. So instead he turned his blood-red eyes onto her, and puffed a plume of smoke, and then as she backed away he readied himself for flight. Once the mother, who was not his mother, had gone back far enough, he launched himself into the air, and spread his wings. Oh, it felt good to be in the air again. It had been far too long since he had flown. He flew higher and higher before he opened his wings, and roared for all to hear. As the birds flew out of the trees, he unleashed a delighted plume of smoke. He spared one last glance for the mother, who was not his mother. She looked so small down on the ground, and then he opened his wings and flew to where the falcon dwelled. He crossed castles, grass, and rivers. Each time he flew past an establishment where one of the two-legged people lived, he roared, so that they could see his presence and know the strength he had. Often he heard them gasp in wonder. Others nearly cried and tried to pray to their seven for protection, But he did not heed their worries, for it was not them he wanted. No, he continued flying high and long into the night and the day after that. He hunted some of the livestock, and often found himself wanting more. But he knew what he had been freed for, and knew that he needed to find his rider's love, before he could truly eat freely. As the mountains of the Falcon came into view, it was dark. The sky was as black as sin, as black as Balerion had been when he had been a boy. The boy within him remembered. He was silent for his rider, knew that the art to getting what he wanted lay in silence and patience, though the dragon inside of him clamored to roar and burn down those who would dare take from him and his rider. He flew over the mountains of the moon, as the humans called them, flew over the Bloody Gate, a name provided by a long-forgotten memory. And then as he got close to the castle of the Falcon, he saw riders approaching, flying not the banner of the lion as they had when the rider's love had been taken, but the mockingbird of their actual lord. Serak felt his rider grow angry. There was only one man he knew of, who had a mockingbird for a sigil, and that man was supposed to be a friend to the mother, who was not his mother. The fact that this man had taken his love from him deeply angered him. The man would pay for it with his life. He landed off away from the castle of the Falcon in some woodlands, and watched as the riders brought in a woman who he knew was his rider's love. She was unmoving, though he could feel her heart beat in his head, almost as surely as he could feel her thoughts. And they were scared and confused, and with his greater vision he saw as the mockingbird man walked out to greet the riders, and laid a loving hand on the rider's love's face, and then kissed her. Serak felt his rider's anger mix in with his own. How dare this man kiss his queen? How dare he take what was not his? Serak roared his anger into the night, and when the birds fluttered out of the trees, and the men turned to look toward the woods where he was hidden, he heard the rider's love say, Serak, and roared once more to let her know she was not alone. In Riverrun, as Serak roared and bellowed, Jon Targaryen shot up in his bed, and wincing with the pain, shouted for Serak Bustan, who came running into the room, followed by Lady Catelyn and Brienne. Jon looked at them and then said, I know where Sansa is. Send word to Robb. I want men sent to the Vale. They are to bring Sansa back, and bring me Littlefinger, in chains. Bran. Something about the way the raven screamed sent a shiver running up Bran's spine. I am almost a man grown. He had to remind himself, I have to be brave now. But the air was sharp and cold and full of fear. Even Summer was afraid. The fur on his neck was bristling. Shadows stretched against the hillside, black and hungry. All the trees were bowed and twisted by the weight of ice they carried. Some hardly looked like trees at all. Buried from root to crown in frozen snow, they huddled on the hill like giants, monstrous and misshapen creatures hunched against the icy wind. They are here. The ranger drew his long sword. Where? Mira's voice was hushed. Close? I don't know. Somewhere. The raven shrieked again. Hodor, whispered Hodor. He had his hands tucked up beneath his armpits. Icicles hung from the brown briar of his beard, and his mustache was a lump of frozen snot, glittering redly in the light of the sunset. Those wolves are close as well, Bran warned them. The ones that have been following us. Summer can smell them whenever we're downwind. Wolves are the least of our woes, said Cold Hands. We have to climb. It will be dark soon. You would do well to be inside before night comes. Your warmth will draw them. He glanced to the west, where the light of the setting sun could be seen dimly through the trees, like the glow of a distant fire. Is this the only way in? Asked Mira. The back door is 3 leagues north, down a sinkhole. That was all he had to say. Not even Hodor could climb down into a sinkhole with Bran heavy on his back, and Jojen could no more walk 3 leagues than walk 1,000. Mira eyed the hill above. The way looks clear. Looks, the ranger muttered darkly. Can you feel the cold? There's something here. Where are they? Inside the cave, suggested Mira. The cave is warded. They cannot pass. The ranger used his sword to point. You can see the entrance there, halfway up, between the weir woods, that cleft in the rocks. I see it, said Bran. Ravens were flying in and out. Hodor shifted his weight. Hodor. A fold in the rock, that's all I see, said Mira. There's a passage there. Steep and twisty at first. A runnel through the rock. If you can reach it, you'll be safe. What about you? The cave is warded. Mira studied the cleft in the hillside. It can't be more than 1,000 yards from here to there. No, thought Bran, but all those yards are upward. The hill was steep and thickly wooded. The snow had stopped 3 days ago, but none of it had melted. Beneath the trees, the ground was blanketed in white, still pristine and unbroken. "No one's here," said Bran, bravely. "Look at the snow. There are no footprints." "The White Walkers go lightly on the snow," the ranger said. "You'll find no prints to mark their passage." A raven descended from above to settle on his shoulder. Only a dozen of the big blackbirds remained with them. The rest had vanished along the way. Every dawn when they arose, there had been fewer of them. "Come," the bird squawked. "Come, come." "The three-eyed crow," thought Bran, "the green seer." "It's not so far," he said. "A little climb and we'll be safe. Maybe we can have a fire." All of them were cold and wet and hungry, except the ranger, and Jojen Reed was too weak to walk unaided. "You go." Mira bent down beside her brother. He was settled in the bolt of an oak, eyes closed, shivering violently. What little of his face could be seen beneath his hood and scarf was colorless as the surrounding snow, but breath still puffed faintly from his nostrils whenever he exhaled. Mira had been carrying him all day. Food and fire will set him right again. Bran tried to tell himself, though he wasn't sure it would. "I can't fight and carry Jojen both, the climb's too steep," Mira was saying. "Hodor, you take Bran up to that cave." Hodor clapped his hands together. "Jojen just needs to eat," Bran said, miserably. It had been 12 days since the elk had collapsed for the third and final time, since Cold Hands had knelt beside it in the snowbank and murmured a blessing in some strange tongue as he slit its throat. Bran wept like a little girl when the bright blood came rushing out. He had never felt more like a cripple than he did then, watching helplessly as Mira and Cold Hands butchered the brave beast who had carried them so far. He told himself he would not eat, that it was better to go hungry than to feast upon a friend, but in the end he'd eaten twice, once in his own skin and once in Summer's. As gaunt and starved as the elk had been, the stakes the ranger had carved from him had sustained them for 7 days, until they finished the last of them huddled over a fire in the ruins of an old hill fort. "He needs to eat," Mira agreed, smoothing her brother's brow. "We all do, but there's no food here. Go." Bran blinked back a tear and felt it freeze upon his cheek. Cold Hands took Hodor by the arm. "The light is fading. If they're not here now, they will be soon. Come." Hodor followed Cold Hands up the hill, all the while panting heavily from the exhaustion that their journey and having to carry Bran had exerted on him. As they walked up the hill and it got gradually steeper, Bran counted the yards down till they were only 60 yards away from the entrance to the cave. When Hodor fell down into the snow, screaming and rolling around, crushing the crippled boy beneath him. Something has a hold of his leg, Bran thought as he watched Hodor thrash on the ground, unable to move, and fearing each moment as if it could be his last. Whites descended on them from their alcoves on the hill, pulling and grabbing them with an intensity that scared Bran. "They mean to kill me now, where I am," Bran realized as he slipped into Hodor's skin, and felt them pushing and pulling at the stable boy, cutting him and making him bleed. As he felt the light begin to dim, back in his own mind, Bran wondered dimly what Mira would think if he were to suddenly tell her he loved her. Up above them, flaming figures were dancing in the snow. The Whites. Bran realized. Someone has set the Whites on fire. Summer was snarling and snapping as he danced around the closest, a great ruin of a man wreathed in swirling flame. He shouldn't get so close. What is he doing? Then he saw himself sprawled face down in the snow. Summer was trying to drive the thing away from him. What will happen if it kills me? The boy wondered. Will I be Hodor for once and for all? Will I go back into Summer's skin? Or will I just be dead? The world moved dizzily around him. White trees, black sky, red flames, everything was whirling, shifting, spinning. He felt himself stumbling. He could hear Hodor screaming. A cloud of ravens was pouring from the cave, and he saw a little girl, with a torch in hand, darting this way and that. For a moment Bran thought it was his sister Arya, madly, for he knew his little sister was 1,000 leagues away. And there she was, whirling a scrawny thing, ragged, wild, and her hair at angle. Tears filled Hodor's eyes and froze there. Everything turned inside out, and upside down, and Bran found himself back inside his own skin, half buried in the snow. The burning white loomed over him, etched tall against the trees in their snowy shrouds. It was one of the naked ones, Bran saw, in the instant before the nearest tree shook off the snow that covered it, and dropped it all down upon his head. The next he knew he was lying on a bed of pine needles beneath a dark stone roof. The cave I'm in, the cave. His mouth still tasted of blood where he'd bitten his tongue, but a fire was burning to his right, the heat washing over his face, and he had never felt something so good. Summer was there, sniffing around him, and Hodor soaking wet. Mira cradled Jojen's head in her lap, and the Arya thing stood over them, clutching her torch. "The snow," Bran said. "It fell on me, buried me. Ed you? I pulled you out." Mira nodded at the girl. "It was her who saved us, though. The torch? Fire kills them. Fire burns them. Fire is always hungry." That was not Arya's voice, nor any child's. It was a woman's voice, high and sweet, with a strange music in it, like none he had ever heard, and a sadness that he thought might break his heart. Bran squinted to see her better. It was a girl, but smaller than Arya, her skin dappled like a doe's beneath a cloak of leaves. Her eyes were queer, large and liquid, gold and green slitted, like cat's eyes. No one has eyes like that. Her hair was a tangle of brown and red and gold, autumn colors, with vines and twigs and withered flowers wove through it. "Who are you?" Mira Reed was asking. Bran knew. "She's a child of the forest." He shivered, as much from wonderment as from cold. They had fallen into one of Old Man's tales. "The first men named us children," the little woman said. "The giants called us Wodak Nagran, the squirrel people, because we were small and quick and fond of trees, but we are not squirrels. No children. Our name in the true tongue means those who sing the song of earth. Before your old tongue was ever spoken, we had sung our song 10,000 years. Mira said, "You speak the common tongue now." For him, the Bran boy, "I was born in the time of the dragon, and for 200 years I walked the world of men, to watch and listen and learn. I might be walking still, but my legs were sore, and my heart was weary, so I turned my feet for home." 200 years, said Mira. The child smiled. "Men, they are the children." "Do you have a name?" asked Bran. "When I need one," she waved her torch toward the black crack in the back wall of the cave. "Our way is down. You must come with me now." Bran shivered again. "The ranger, he cannot come. They'll kill him." "No, they killed him long ago. Come now. It is warmer down deep, and no one will hurt you there. He is waiting for you." They followed the child down the cave and past lines and lines of bones and skulls of creatures, and once or twice Bran could have sworn he heard the whispering of voices deep within the cave, as well as the sound of a hammer hitting steel. Though whether or not these were actual sounds and not just his imagination, he could not be sure. Eventually they came to a stop, and before them a pale lord in ebon finery sat dreaming in a tangled nest of roots, a woven weirwood throne that embraced his withered limbs as a mother does a child. His body was so skeletal, and his clothes so rotted, that at first Bran took him for another corpse, a dead man propped up so long that the roots had grown over him, under him, and through him. What skin the corpse lord showed was white, save for a bloody blotch that crept up his neck onto his cheek. His white hair was fine and long enough to brush against the earthen floor. Root coiled around his legs like wooden serpents. One burrowed through his breeches into the desiccated flesh of his thigh to emerge from his skull, and gray mushrooms spotted his brow. A little skin remained, stretched across his face, tight and hard as white leather, but even that was fraying, and here and there the brown and yellow bone beneath was poking through. "Are you the three-eyed crow?" Bran heard himself say. "A three-eyed crow should have 3 eyes. He has only one, and that one red." Bran could feel the eyes staring at him, shining like a pool of blood in the torchlight, where his other eye should have been. A thin white root grew from an empty socket, down his cheek and into his neck. "A crow?" The pale lord's voice was dry. His lips moved slowly, as if they had forgotten how to form words. "Once, I, black of garb and black of blood. The clothes he wore were rotten and faded, spotted with moss and eaten through with worms. But once they had been black, I have been many things, Bran. Now I am as you see me, and now you will understand why I could not come to you, except in dreams. I have watched you for a very long time, watched you with 1,000 eyes and one. I saw your birth, and that of your Lord Father before you. I saw your first step, heard your first word, and was part of your first dream. I was watching when you fell, and now you are come to me at last. Brandon Stark, though the hour is late." "I'm here," Bran said. "Only I'm broken. Will you fix me?" "My legs, I mean." "No," said the Pale Lord. "That is beyond my powers." Bran's eyes filled with tears. We came such a long way. You will never walk again, Bran, the pale lips promised, but you will fly. Edmure cut through yet another bastard wearing the crimson red of the Lannisters, and sighed. They'd been fighting for 3 days now, ever since word had reached Harrenhal of Lannisters, and Tyrells being camped close by. Everyone had been extremely nervous, though strangely enough the Lannister-Tyrell force led by Tyrion Lannister and Mace Tyrell did not seem keen to push on for whatever reason. And that confused Edmure deeply, though he was determined not to let them get away again. His thoughts were interrupted when he saw a big figure running toward him with their sword raised. Edmure managed to avoid their swing, and then managed to quickly jab his sword into the man's chest before pulling back and then raising his sword to block the man's swing. Before managing rather luckily, he supposed, plunging his sword straight into the man's chest before pulling his sword out again, and watched as the man wearing the sigil of House Crakehall on his armor fell to the ground dead. Edmure's respite, however, was brief. Another bloody Crakehall bastard came running at him, swinging his sword like a madman. It was all mad thrusts and jabs from this Crakehall, and it took all Edmure had in him to continue to raise his sword to block the man's swings, even though he could feel his arms jarring each time steel met steel. Eventually the man managed to get a nick on his armor, and Edmure could feel blood coming out of his arm. In retaliation, Edmure sent a series of swings at the man, connecting a few times to draw a lot of blood, before they were back to swinging and blocking each other again. Then Edmure spotted a gap in the man's armor between his chest and shoulder, managing to knock the man's sword away from him, just quick enough to plunge his sword into the gap before pulling out. Edmure moved away from the man as he began to bleed to his death. Edmure then came across a man with the great cluster of House Redwine on his armor. The dance began again. Edmure moved on from the man and continued hacking and slashing through the ranks of the Lannister and Tyrell soldiers in his path, before he came face to face with Sarah Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers. The two men began exchanging several choice words to each other, before circling each other on their horses. Edmure was the first to break the circling, bringing his horse closer to Sarah and swinging at him, and connecting and hitting the exposed flesh of the younger man's leg. Sarah managed to do one better, and struck Edmure high on his chest. Then they were clashing steel against one another, neither willing to give ground to the other, before breaking apart and resuming the dance once more. Steel on steel, and it was as if time had come to a standstill for Edmure. All he heard was the sound of steel on steel, and occasionally the sound of steel denting armor, and the feeling of pain as another wound opened up on his body. Edmure noted that Sarah seemed to be wielding a dark steel blade. He wondered where the man had gotten it from. Edmure couldn't stop to dwell on his thoughts for much longer, though, for he was soon back in a trance-like state, as steel clashed with steel, and wounds were opened both fresh and old on both men's bodies. But neither man seemed willing to accept defeat and die. Eventually Edmure felt as if he was going to pass out from the amount of pain he was in, as well as the amount of blood he had lost, and it looked to him as if the mighty Sir Loras Lannister was experiencing the same problems. Using what little remained of his strength, Edmure managed to raise his sword with enough force to knock Sir Loras' sword out of his hand and swing back up, and he felt his sword connect with skin, but he wasn't too sure how that could be. But all doubts were soon wiped from his mind as Edmure slumped on his horse and saw black. Edmure awoke in his tent some hours later to a feeling of deep pain. Wincing, he tried to sit up but found himself unable to. Taking note of the darkness in the tent and outside, he supposed that it was nighttime, and wondered briefly what the outcome of the battle had been, and whether or not Sarah had lived or not. He pressed his hands to his sides and winced once more as he felt a sharp jolt of pain shoot up through him. This time his cries brought a Maester scurrying into his tent, carrying some foul-smelling ointment. The Maester lifted the quilt and moved Edmure's hands out of the way and applied the ointment to the wounds on Edmure's sides and chest. All the while Edmure tried to bite back the gas of pain that kept threatening to escape his lips. Eventually the Maester finished his ministrations and left the tent. But as he left, the tent flap was open, and Edmure could hear not a single sound from outside, and began to deeply worry. What had happened during the course of the battle, when he had found Sarah? It had been clear that his and Bronn Jon's men were gaining ground, as it were. For the Lannisters and the Tyrell forces seemed deeply reluctant to actually engage in battle for some reason, which ultimately mean that they seemed to be losing far more men than the River or Vale men were. Edmure decided to let it be for the time being, and to call upon Lord Royce, when in the morning. As he closed his eyes and allowed sleep to take him, Edmure found that he was dreaming of his wife, who was far away and relatively safe in the twins and whom had written to him to tell him that she was with child. He wondered if it would be a boy or a girl. Morning came, and Edmure forced himself to get out of bed despite the protests of the army maester. As he got out of his tent, wearing a shirt and breeches, he saw the snow on the ground and also saw that some patches of it were littered with blood. He made his way over to the command tent, and upon entering it found Lord Royce, Lord Corbray, Lord Blackwood, and Lord Bracken deep in discussion. They stopped upon seeing him standing in the entrance. Lord Royce grimaced and said, "My Lord of Tully, it is good to see you. But should you not be in bed?" Edmure grimaced also and replied, "I wish to know what the outcome of the battle was, my lords." He began to worry when he saw them look at each other, unsure looks on each of their faces. Lord Blackwood broke the tension. "Well, Sarah Loras lies injured in our cells, and you should be in bed, my lord. Your bandages are staining, but other than that, we are not sure. The Lannister Tyrell forces, as you know, did not seem willing to commit to full-on battle, and at one point, the retreated south, we did not give chase for we needed to tend to our wounded. But our scouts report that they made way for Sow's Horn in the south." Edmure sighed and asked, "Has there been word from Lord Tarley about what happened at the Blue Fork?" Lord Royce nodded and said, "Lord Dickon Tarley wrote to us and said that Lord Rowan and his host have been defeated and put to the sword. Lord Randall was killed, as were several other major lords. We do believe that the Lannisters may have retreated back south to plan their next move." Edmure sighed and said, "Very well then. We must write to Riverrun to inform them." Robb. The journey to Maidenpool had taken them longer than expected. What should have been a comfortable 2-week journey had, because of war and the weather, taken them a full month. It had taken its toll. As he looked into the mirror, Robb could see the beginning of a few gray hairs appearing in amongst an auburn curls, and sighed. Along with the war, the constant fighting and the worry over whether or not they would find Sansa alive or not, Robb was surprised that he had not snapped. It also did not help, he thought to himself, that Jon's aunt Daenerys seemed to be hell-bent on making the whole purpose of his trip here a living nightmare for him. She had been a courtliest enough hostess when he had first arrived in Maidenpool a week ago, treating him and his companions with food and drink, and allowing them some time to relax and get rested. But then when it had come to the actual discussion of an alliance, she had proved very, very unreliable, and had shifted from one position to the next with alarming regularity. She had started off by claiming that she wished to simply help Jon win back the Iron Throne and get Sansa back, and that she too wished to see the Lancetors pay for what they had done to both their respective families. She said not a word about Jon's claim or who would actually rule the kingdoms once the fighting was done. She simply stated that she wished to help restore her family to their rightful position as rulers of Westeros. Then she had begun ranting and raving at Robb about how she seriously doubted the truth of Jon's claim to the throne, and that he was only a pretender to her throne, that he was a mummer's dragon, and that she, Daenerys Targaryen, was the only rightful ruler of the Iron Throne in Westeros. She had gone on to say how slighted she felt that her nephew had sent her the son of one of the usurper's dogs as an envoy, and questioned why Jon had not come himself. When Robb had tried to point out that Jon had been severely injured during Sansa's kidnapping, Daenerys had laughed and had told him in no uncertain terms that no true dragon would allow a minor wound to stop them from getting what they truly wanted. Robb had been completely surprised by the sudden change in Daenerys' attitude and approach to their negotiating. It was like he was speaking to two completely different people, and it seemed like the words once spoke by King Jaehaerys II about the gods tossing a coin each time a Targaryen was born to see where it would land was definitely true. For whilst it seemed that the coin had landed on greatness for Jon, the gods were still undecided about Daenerys. He supposed it did not help that Daenerys always listened to the words of advice spoken to her by her bear, the exiled Jorah Mormont, whom Robb vaguely remembered as having fled Westeros when Robb's Lord Father had come to Bear Island to mete out justice to Jorah for selling slaves. It became apparent very quickly to Robb and his companions that Jorah had his own agenda, and from the way he looked at Daenerys as if she hung the moon, Robb suspected he knew what that agenda was, though he had not openly voiced it to his companions or in Daenerys' company for fear of inciting her wrath, or more importantly, her dragon's wrath. Her dragons, Rhaegal and Viserion, flew high above the city of Maidenpool, roaring and screeching for all to hear. It was quite an intimidating sight, though of course her dragons were nowhere near as big as Jon Serak's, a point that Robb had almost let slip out when Daenerys had been going on about how she with her 2 dragons would win the throne back for herself, with fire and blood. Robb had been tempted to point out that if it did come to battle between Jon and Daenerys, then it was more than likely that Jon would win, simply because Jon and Serak had more experience as rider and dragon together in battle than Daenerys likely did. Plus, it was evident that whatever control Daenerys might exercise over her dragons, it was tenuous at best, nothing like the control Jon had over Serak, and that was something that deeply concerned Robb and his companions. How could they trust Daenerys and her dragons to act with them against the Lannisters, when they did not know whether or not Daenerys' dragons would act with her or against her? To make matters worse, at least in Robb's opinion, the Red Priestess who had been Stannis' shadow had now taken up residence with Daenerys and claimed that she was her Red God's chosen one, and that she was the one who would lead Westeros from the darkness and into the light. This, of course, had made things so much more difficult, for now it seemed as if Daenerys would openly challenge Jon's claim to the throne, simply because the Red Woman who had claimed Stannis as her Lord's chosen was now claiming her as the chosen one. If she did challenge Jon's claim to the throne, then it was likely that they would have to fight a war on 2 fronts, which could turn out to be very costly and just the thing that would make the Lannisters feel right at home. So Robb was surprised when he heard a knock on his room door, and opened it to find himself staring down at Daenerys Stormborn herself. She was wearing a very revealing lilac dress, and her hair was falling about her face and neck, and as she looked up at him with her violet eyes, Robb felt his breath catch. He heard her laugh.
"My Lord of Stark, are you not even going to invite me in?"
Robb could only wordlessly nod, and beckon her in. She laughed again and sauntered into his room, closing the door behind her as she entered. She stood before him once more, and then said, "I have made up my mind and have an answer for you to give to your cousin about our proposed alliance." Robb nodded dumbly. Daenerys chuckled again and said, "I have decided to ally myself with Jon, and shall provide my strength to his as we fight the Lannisters and the Tyrells and march on King's Landing. Once the city is taken, I expect the 2 of us to discuss who shall be ruling the city and the kingdom." Robb nodded again. Daenerys smiled up at him, then got on her tiptoes and kissed him full on the mouth, before getting down again and making to walk out the room. But just before she left, she turned round and said to him, "It is a shame that you are already married, Lord Stark. I think the 2 of us could have got along famously." She walked out the door, closing it behind her, and leaving Robb in a dazed and confused state of mind. Sansa. She was scared. That much Sansa knew. One minute she had been talking with Arya. The next minute there had been complete chaos for Sir Reynold Westerling. Jane's brother had stabbed Jon in the stomach. Everyone had then tried to hurry back into the castle, and had not heard the sounds of oncoming hooves and had not seen the flying Lannister banners. Sansa had though, and she had tried to make her way as quickly back to Riverrun's courtyard as possible. She had given Arya to her mother, but then had been lost in the rabble as everyone in attendance hurried to get inside and make sure that Jon did not lose too much blood. Before she knew what was happening, she had felt strong arms wrap around her waist and hoist her up onto a horse. She had screamed then, screamed and screamed even as the man who had taken her rode away and no help seemed forthcoming. She had screamed until the man holding her had hit her on the head and knocked her out. When she had awoken, she had heard the sound of a river flowing through nearby, and had raised her head tentatively and found herself on the banks of the Red Fork. She had gotten up then and looked around her, to find her bearings, and that had been when she had seen the flying crimson-red Lannister banners, and had felt dread pull up in the pit of her stomach. Her kidnappers had been the Lannisters, and they were no doubt about to take her back to King's Landing, back to Joffrey and Cersei, and their punishments. She had put her hands protectively around her stomach then, for she was with child, be it a boy or a girl she knew not, but she knew she would protect it with her life if she had to. That same day her captors had ridden further east, continuing past the Red Fork, and only stopping late that night when they reached the banks of the Trident. There Sansa had seen the banners of House Rowan flying, as well as the banners of House Lannister and Joffrey's own sigil, the Lion and the Stag combatant, and her feeling of dread had intensified. They were definitely going to be taking her back to King's Landing now, and who knew what sort of punishment she would face. Firstly for escaping, and secondly for now being with child, Jon's child. Her captors had led her down when they reached camp, and had led her to a tent. Not Lord Rowan's tent though, but the tent which had the banner of a goat daying on it. The man she had been presented to had leered at her and had slathered at her when he had spoke. He had talked about how he would get such a reward for delivering the Targaryen boy's wife to the Lannisters. He had then taken her along with his men, whom he called the Brave Companions, though they were not brave at all, in Sansa's opinion, merely stupid and scary. They had continued their journey east, and had ridden hard and long. They had stopped at various inns on their journey, and often the men of the Brave Companions would get drunk and speak of all the riches and gold that they would get from giving her back to the Lannisters. But there had been one man, the man she had met at the Trident, whose banner was that of a goat, who said nothing whilst his men drunkenly talked of what they would do with the Lannister gold, until one night as Sansa was getting ready for bed, he stumbled into her room, and held a knife to her throat, and told her in his slathering voice, "We Vez, not voring to Vannisters. Oh no, I am not such a Vedi as that. No Vez, voris to the Vale. Oh yes, voris to Vale, we vori." Sansa had not understood that. Why would he take her not to the Lancers but to the Vale? The Vale had declared for Jon, and these men were clearly working for the Lancers, so why would they betray them? It had all become clearer when they had eventually arrived at the gates of the Aery seat to House Arryn and home to her Aunt Lysa, her cousin Robert, and as she learnt as she was forced down from her horse, Lord Baelish. Sansa had felt her heart sink when she saw Lord Baelish standing on the steps of the Aery watching her with hungry eyes, and a sly smile on his face. He was a Lancer man, he had been a friend of her mother's. But he was a Lancer man, he still worked for the Lancers. She knew it deep down in her bones. She knew that he would give her back to the Lancers for whatever reward they would give him. When she had been forced from her horse and made to kneel before him, he had laughed and lifted her up, and she could have sworn she heard him murmur his mother's name before he kissed her full on the mouth. He broke the kiss when a deep, threatening roar could be heard echoing throughout the grounds and the surrounding area, and she had just known that somehow Serak Jon's dragon was nearby, and judging by the look of absolute terror that crossed the Brave Companions' faces as well as the look of mild panic that crossed Lord Baelish's face briefly, she knew that they knew as well what had caused that noise. Of course Baelish had paid the Brave Companions, and sent them on their way. He had then led Sansa into the Aery, and had promised to protect her and look after her for the time being, all the while looking at her like she was a piece of meat. It had been a few weeks since that day, and each day she grew more and more worried about what Lord Baelish's intentions towards her were. Every time they were together in company, or in front of her aunt, he would play the caring man, always asking after her health and such, but in private he stole kisses and sometimes forced her to do more for him. All the while with a sly smile on his face, and words of protection and that he was doing what was best for her on his lips. Benjen! It was cold then again, it was always cold this far north, always had been, always would be. The cold of the wall often reminded Lord Commander Benjen Stark of wintry nights in the halls of Winterfell, sitting by the fire with his father and siblings, listening as old Nan or his mother recounted stories from ages past, or playing in the snows that often graced Winterfell's gardens and courtyard during winter or summer, running around throwing snowballs and making snowmen with Lya. Of course that had been long ago when he had still had dreams of perhaps becoming a knight in the south, or becoming the captain of his elder brother's guard in Winterfell, back when the world had seemed normal, when it had been Brandon set to marry Catelyn Tully, and Lya was to marry Robert Baratheon, Ned's oldest friend, before Harrenhal, before the dragon idiot set eyes on his sister, and made her lose sense of her honor and her duty with a few sweet poisonous words. But of course Harrenhal had happened, Robert's rebellion had happened, and at the end of it all it had just been him and Ned left of the pack. And Ned had brought home a young southern bride and 2 boys. He needed to get his own house in order and did not need to be buried under the doubts and guilt that racked his younger sibling. So Benjen Stark had made a decision one day 16 years ago. He remembered the recruiter who had come calling in Harrenhal, and when the same man came and stopped by Winterfell one day in the early years of Robert's reign, Benjen had decided to ride north with him when he returned. 16 years he had been at the wall, slowly working his way up the ranks, and clamping down on his guilt and regrets. Yes, the cold of the wall had always been a reminder of his home, the only true reminder of Winterfell that he would need without it, dredging up old memories. Painful memories. Memories that were better left, not thought about, and buried in the recesses of his mind. At least that had been the case until he had returned from his ranging. He had seen the dead come back to life. He had felt the unnatural chill of the White Walkers as they had converged on his men. He had fought the wildlings, though he knew it was a futile effort, for they were only doing what was a normal human instinct, fleeing south from the dangers of the furthermost north. No, once the cold had been a balm to Benjen Stark's hurts and memories, now it was merely a reminder of the upcoming war that he would have to fight. After the fighting with the wildlings, the Watch had been left with no commander, Mormont having been killed in his tower, Marsh having taken a severe wound, old Donald Maya dead at the hands of a giant. Elections had been called, and the cronies from King's Landing, Janos Slynt and Alistair Thorne, had put themselves forward, though both men had done nothing to prove themselves during the battle. So Daenerys Mallister and Cotter Pike had also put their names forward, though both had withdrawn once Benjen had made it clear that he intended to stand for the post. For though he knew Sir Daenerys and Cotter Pike meant well, both men were incredibly stubborn and did not truly appreciate the depth of the threat that was coming from the north. Truth be told, neither did he, but he had some sort of idea, and so he had been elected the 98th Lord Commander by his sworn brothers, and had begun the momentous task of preparing for both a potential wildling invasion and the oncoming war with death itself. As it turned out, the task of dealing with the wildlings was much less stressful than he had first imagined. Their numbers had been significantly reduced during the battle, thanks to help from Robb and Jon, especially from Jon's behemoth of a dragon, Mance Rayder. Tormund Giantsbane and Rattleshirt had all been killed during the battle, and the three were major wildling commanders. Those wildlings that had not perished at the hands of Dragonfire or from steel had either been captured and sworn to help defend the wall, or had fled with the Weeper. It was the man himself, not the potential men and women he commanded, that worried Benjen. During his long years as a sworn brother, the Weeper had crossed the wall several times, each time coming back with more plunder and loot. He had never been caught despite the attempts of some of the best rangers the Watch had ever seen. It was rumored that it was the Weeper who encouraged Mance Rayder's bid to become king beyond the wall. Yes, the Weeper himself would be more of a challenge. The man Benjen knew would be stubborn and unyielding and would try and lead his people over the wall over as many Black Brothers' corpses as he possibly could. Benjen had sent several scouting parties out to see if they could track the man's movements. So far only 2 of the parties he had sent out had come back, both reporting the same thing. The Weeper was gathering the remnants of Mance Rayder's host and marching south. Of the White Walkers they had no news, but Benjen had already set Samwell Tarly off to the old library in Castle Black to find out what he could of these mysterious creatures, as well as asking Maester Aemon, the Fountain of Knowledge that he was, what he knew of the pale white creatures, who seemed to be the very embodiment of death itself. As it turned out, information about the White Walkers was scarce in Castle Black, and even Maester Aemon himself seemed devoid of any significant knowledge about them, something which deeply surprised Benjen, considering that the old Maester had often appeared to know everything that there was to know about the world. He had therefore resolved to send Samwell off to Old Town and the Citadel, where he would train to become a Maester and to learn what he could about the White Walkers, if the Citadel had the books needed to learn what they could. Letters from Shadow Tower and Eastwatch reported seeing a great host of wildlings approaching at a fast pace, and Benjen gave orders for more men to be dispatched to both castles, though after giving the orders he noticed that Castle Black itself seemed rather poorly garrisoned, and was tempted to recall his men, but thought of something he had once overheard his Lord Father tell Brandon once when he was very young. It is always important that before you give an order you think about what the possible consequences of that order could be. For if you give an order and then begin to doubt it, your men will doubt it also, and question you. It was he was thinking this through that Maester Clydas knocked on his door, and announced that a scouting party had returned to Castle Black, bearing urgent news with regards to the White Walkers. Victiri, a Kingsmoot had been called when word had reached Pike of Balon's death. With Asha dead and Theon still a prisoner of the Greenlanders, the Damfair had announced that a Kingsmoot, the first in centuries, was to be held. All the great houses of the Iron Islands had come together on Great Wyke to decide who should be the next king of the islands. He knew that if his brother had his way, it would be him, Victarion, that sat on the Seastone chair, not the Crow's Eye. No, never, the Crow's Eye. That man, though he shared the same blood as both Victarion and the Damfair, was not ironborn enough to sit the Seastone chair, nor was he godly enough. Since the man had been exiled, many strange and horrifying rumors had reached the ears of the remaining Greyjoy brothers. Tales of dark magic and sacrifices and secret dealings had been the talk of Euron Crow's Eye, whenever he was mentioned. The men upon the shore had spied their sails. Shouts echoed across the bay as friends and kin called out greetings, but not from silence. On her decks, a motley crew of mutes and mongrels spoke no word, as the iron victory drew nigh. Men black as tar stared out at him, and others squat and hairy as the apes of Sothoros. Monsters, the Tyrion thought. They dropped anchor 20 yards from Silence. Lower a boat. I would go ashore. He buckled on his sword belt, as the rowers took their places. His long sword rested on one hip, a dirk upon the other. Newt the barber fastened the Lord Captain's cloak about his shoulders. It was made of 9 layers of cloth of gold, sewn in the shape of the Kraken of Greyjoy arms, dangling to his boots. Beneath he wore heavy grey chainmail, over boiled black leather. In Moat Cailin he had taken to wearing mail day and night. Sore shoulders and an aching back were easier to bear than bloody bowels. The poisoned arrows of the bog devils need only scratch a man, and a few hours later, he would be squirting and screaming as his life ran down his legs in gouts of red and brown. Whoever wins the Seastone chair, I shall deal with the bog devils. He had been called from Moat Cailin by a raven from Pike, instructing him to leave a token force behind and make haste for Pike. Balin meant to take Winterfell and needed the islands protected. He had been close to home when he had received the raven right in the hand of the Bolton bastard, proclaiming his brother's death. Victarion donned a tall black warhelm, wrought in the shape of an iron kraken, its arms coiled down around his cheeks to meet beneath his jaw. By then the boat was ready. I put the chests into your charge, he told Newt, as he climbed over the side. See that they are strongly guarded. Much depended on the chests. As you command, your grace. The Crystarian returned a sour scowl. I am no king as yet. He clambered down into the boat. Aeron Damfair was waiting for him in the surf with his waterskin slung beneath one arm. The priest was gaunt and tall, though shorter than Victarion. His nose rose like a shark's fin from a bony face, and his eyes were iron. His beard reached to his waist, and tangled ropes of hair slapped at the back of his legs when the wind blew. Brother, he said, as the waves broke white and cold around their ankles. What is dead can never die, but rises again, harder and stronger. Victarion lifted off his helm and knelt. The bay filled his boots and soaked his breeches, as Arion poured a stream of salt water down upon his brow, and so they prayed. The Damfair helped Victarion stand and then led him to the shore, away from the din coming from the assembled tents. In hushed tones he spoke to Victarion. Brother, you must push your claim. You must... Euron is a godless man who surrounds himself with monsters and sinners. The Drowned One has shown me what will happen to our people if Euron becomes king, and it is not a future I like, nor is it one we should allow to fall on our people. Victarion stared hard at his brother and asked, What are in these visions, brother? What has you so scared? The Damfair looked around them once, then twice. They drew in closer and almost whispered into Victarion's ear. If the Crow's Eye becomes king, Naga shall rise from the grave, and our dead will walk through our islands with white eyes. For the Crow's Eye has given his life away. Victarion sighed. What would you have me do, brother? It is a crime in the eyes of God and men to be a kinslayer. I promised Balon, may he rest in peace, that I would never harm Euron, so long as we both drew breath. The Damfair gave an enigmatic smile and said, Brother, Balon is dead. May he rest in the drowned god's watery halls. But Euron and his crimes live on. Why should he become king when you are the more deserving? The more holy candidate. Why should he take what the Seastone chair? Because it is his right, as the elder brother. But if we were to go by rights, Theon would be king. Not you, nor Euron, but we are not here to elect Theon as king. Are we? That is because he is still in the hands of the Greenlanders, though. Victarion protested. Yes. But he made no attempt to come back to us, did he? He has forgotten his roots and has become soft. He abandoned his true family in order to fight for the ones who took his father, brother's, sister, and mother's lives. He is no Ironborn, merely a pup lost in his skin. He is not fit to be king. Victarion sighed. What would you have me do? The Damfair smiled, a sly smile. Challenge Euron to the finger dance. Not the one the children play, but the finger dance of Naga. He cannot refuse you and still hope to be king. Victarion sighed and said, Very well then, brother, I shall challenge the Crow's Eye. Bran. The moon was a crescent, thin and sharp as the blade of a knife. A pale sun rose and set and rose again. Red leaves whispered in the wind. Dark clouds filled the skies and turned to storms. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, and dead men with black hands and bright blue eyes shuffled round a cleft in the hillside, but could not enter. Under the hill the broken boy sat upon a weirwood throne, listening to whispers in the dark as ravens walked up and down his arms. "You will never walk again," the three-eyed crow had promised, "but you will fly." Sometimes the sound of song would drift up from someplace far below. The children of the forest, Old Nan would have called the singers, but those who sing the song of earth was their own name for themselves, in the true tongue that no human could speak. The ravens could speak it though. Their small black eyes were full of secrets, and they would caw at him and peck his skin when they heard the songs. After the bone-grinding cold of the lands beyond the wall, the caves were blessedly warm, and when the chill crept out of the rock, the singers would light fires to drive it off again. Down here there was no wind, no snow, no ice, no dead things reaching out to grab you, only dreams and rushlight, and the kisses of the ravens. The moon was fat and full, stars wheeled across a black sky. Rain fell and froze, and tree limbs snapped from the weight of the ice. Bran and Mira had made up names for those who sang the song of earth. Ash, Leaf, Scales, Black Knife, Snowy Locks, and Coals. Their true names were too long for human tongues, said Leaf. Only she could speak the common tongue. So what the others thought of their new names Bran never learned. But there were a few new things that Bran learnt during his time in the Cave of the Children. He learnt that the three-eyed crow was called the last Greenseer by the children, that he had once been called Brendan, and that he had once fought in a great war some 100 years before Bran had even been born. He learnt that the three-eyed crow, too, had been led to this very same cave some 50 years ago, when he had been out ranging. He had been led out to the cave by the children, and there had met the last king of the children of the forest, the creature who the three-eyed crow said had fought in the battle for the dawn alongside the last hero. This king had many names, the three-eyed crow said. Some had said in the years and centuries following the battle that the child king had been a god come to help the world in its hour of darkness. Others said that it had been a wizard, or a creation of the imagination. The three-eyed crow said that it was all of these things and more, and that Bran would have heard of the child king in his stories told to him by Old Nan. That the three-eyed crow knew of Old Nan was enough to convince Bran that what he said next must be true. The child king had married into House Stark, had provided its sword to House Stark's founder and presented its knowledge of magic to the founder. The one known as Brandon the Builder had married the last child king, and from their union the line of House Stark had been produced. The three-eyed crow also went on to tell Bran about how his family had been tied to the fate of the Wall and the Night's Watch ever since the day Brandon the Builder had raised the Wall. The stories told in the night to tell children to behave, about how the Wall was there to protect them from wildlings was all a lie, said the three-eyed crow. He said that Bran had seen the truth for the Wall's purpose as he had made his way to the Cave of the Children, that the Wall had been raised to keep the darkness out of the land, that it had been built to keep the White Walkers and the dead out. The three-eyed crow said that for as long as there was magic in the realm and the people of the North remained vigilant, there was no chance for the White Walkers to return. But he said 200 years ago when the last dragon died, the White Walkers began to awaken from their slumber and began preparing for an invasion. A second long night, he called it. The three-eyed crow said that the White Walkers would be much more powerful now than they had been during the first long night. For this time their sworn enemy had been born, and was claiming his throne. Bran did not understand what he meant by that, nor did he truly understand what he meant when he said that there had to be 3 heads to defeat the White Walkers once and for all, and that only 2 had been found. There was much that the three-eyed crow told Bran that he did not truly understand, but he listened nonetheless, and as he was taught all about using his different skins to see the world through new eyes, and as he was taught to see the past, the present, and the future, he learnt about how his role in the coming years would be to observe the realm, and where he felt necessary make changes to the future, if he felt that one outcome would be catastrophic. But he was warned that he could never ever use his power for his own use. He could use it to change events that needed to happen, for that would be playing the hand of the gods, and that the three-eyed crow said was something that they were not. It was during one such vision, as he sat in his weirwood throne, that Bran Stark, the Prince of the Green, saw death and destruction on a field of white stained red, and saw dragons, 3 of them, flying high in the air, burning all in their path. And he saw White Walkers dying and killing, but most of all he saw the Wall, in all its icy glory, falling and collapsing and signaling the battle, the start of the long night, and the battle for the dawn. Jon. Snow lay heavy on the grounds outside Riverrun. Winter had truly come, and with a vengeance. It had also brought with it more news of the war. From Harrenhal they received word that the forces led by Lord Edmure and Lord Royce had fought the Lannister Tyrell host, and had inflicted some serious damage onto the host, forcing it to retreat back to Soa's Horn. But they also wrote that Lord Edmure had been seriously injured during the fighting, most specifically during a fight against Loras Tyrell, which had ended in Sir Loras dying from his wounds some days later, and Lord Edmure still holding on to his life by the skin of his teeth. Robb had also returned after being away from Riverrun for 2 months. He brought with him Daenerys Targaryen, Jon's aunt, though it was hard to accept her as such when she was so young, no older than him, truth be told, and her 2 dragons and the 9,000 men of the Golden Company, plus Stannis Baratheon's Red Woman, Melisandre. Daenerys had bent the knee to him, yet Jon was always weary whenever he spoke to her, or was in her presence. For he got the feeling that she was waiting for an opportunity, any opportunity to prove herself more of a dragon, more of a ruler than him. He had to admit she had some strange concepts of ruling. She seemed more inclined to take back the Iron Throne, through simply using their dragons, and whilst Jon admitted that might solve a few problems, it was no way to truly win the people of Westeros over to their cause, as he had said many a time during many a heated argument with his aunt. Their progress was not helped, he thought, by the constant whisperings of Ser Jorah Mormont, who by all rights was a condemned man, having fled justice many years ago, when Jon had just been barely more than a babe, the same age as Rickon was now. He had pointed this out to Robb one day, when it was just them and Sarah Barristan and Aunt Catelyn, and he asked Robb why he had not taken the man's head there and then, and Robb had stuttered and spluttered, before finally saying that it did not seem prudent to do so, when it was clear that Daenerys found Ser Jorah's counsel and presence all the more assuring. Though, from what Jon could gather from Sarah Barristan and Lord Connington, the man was by all accounts a bit of a brute, and his true motives for staying with Daenerys were to be questioned thoroughly, and he was to be kept watch on always, something Jon had been reluctant to do at first, though he had gone through with having some men look around and see what Ser Jorah was truly about. As of yet they had found nothing suspicious, and yet Jon could not help feel like he was missing something. Some valuable piece of information that could make it that much easier to truly understand Daenerys, who was a part of this other family that Jon belonged to, but did not truly feel connected with. There was something about her, the way she spoke, the way she acted, that deeply unsettled him. It was almost as if she was truly planning to do something to him, almost as if their current inaction was frustrating her, and she seemed like to do something rash. That something manifested itself through her proposal that they marry, following on with the Targaryen tradition. Jon was horrified by the idea. He was married to Sansa, whom he loved, who held a place in his heart that none else could. Even if he was not married to Sansa, he did not think he could give himself to Daenerys, and when she suggested that it would be better that he marry her now, for Sansa could very well be dead, Jon had nearly lost it and had almost decided to throw her out, but Robb's hand on his arm and Aunt Catelyn's soothing words had calmed his temper. He would not give up on Sansa. He could not give up on Sansa. Serak had returned to Riverrun some days ago, and with him had come an attached note from King's Landing written in the Spider's hand, and it explained how the Spider was doing all he could to make sure that Sansa stayed safe and escaped soon, though she would be great with child now, and Jon worried that perhaps the stress of escaping and traveling would be too much for her to cope with. He wondered if he should not just fly to the Eyrie now and burn Lord Baelish out of his hovel and have him burnt. Or better yet, hung, drawn and quartered for daring to take Sansa, for having the gall of claiming to be a friend to the man Jon would always see as his father, and then betraying him at the moment it suited him. As Jon brooded over various decisions to do with Daenerys and Sansa, Robb and Lord Connington began organizing the next military campaign. Their scouts had reported that Tywin Lannister was moving his host from Sogh's Horn and was planning on marching to the Trident. It had been taken into consideration that perhaps they could be delayed on their way there, but that had been knocked down, and instead they were allowed through. Jon was told that they would be marching for the Trident very soon, and all 3 dragons would need to be used to fully deal with the Lannister threat. Despite whatever objections or moral qualms anyone had about using all 3 dragons, it was agreed that that was the only way to truly finish this war once and for all. Then they could march on King's Landing and take it, and if Sansa was not free by then, Jon swore to himself that he would fly to the Vale and burn Lord Baelish, and anyone who stood in his way. He would let them harm his wife ever again.
Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed this reimagined story and audiobook style presentation, feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. New stories and alternate scenarios are updated regularly. Now see you in the next video.